Okay guys, so it's me again, the Rogue, Ipis from the Rogue Feminist. I decided I wanted to do a video about satire, so I'm going to call this Satire 101 because there seems to be a lot of confusion about what is satire, what's good satire, and how do we understand satire and critique satire. So the first thing I want to talk about is my definition of satire, and from what I can tell what satire is, oh gosh, I feel like I'm already saying the word satire too much, is it's usually a humorous, tongue-in-cheek way of critiquing society or social norms. But it can really be to critique or ridicule anything, but I think effective satire is social norms in society. But we could say the most basic version is a tongue-in-cheek, sarcastic, non-literal way of critiquing or ridiculing something, often through exaggeration and sarcasm. So one thing to understand is if something really is satire, because people often use the term satire to make excuses for things not being sexist or racist, and I'm going to talk about why that doesn't work. But one thing that makes something satire is it's not literal. Like, that's like the first thing. If it's literal, it's not satire. Okay, like, it's not satire. There's two meanings. So when you see something that's satirical, it's got the literal meaning and then the actual meaning. So one example I can give is, let me think of like something really fast. I should have been more prepared. So if I'm like satirizing, like, okay, like example, post on Tumblr does this a lot. Like if some post on Tumblr is like satirizing white guys or something, like interrupting conversation. So the post might say like, oh, my white male tears, don't hurt my feelings, you shouldn't say those things that I don't want to hear, or something like that. This isn't like that sophisticated, obviously. Okay, the literal meaning is, you hurt my feelings, I don't want to hear you talk about sexism and racism. But the actual meaning is, white men are blowing their feelings out of proportion, and they're interrupting conversations that they really don't have a part in, and they're making it about themselves yet again. And we're ridiculing them for making a big deal out of this, because all we're doing is talking about what we want to talk about, or whatever. So clearly, the literal meaning isn't being stated. It's actually under it. It's still pretty simplistic, straightforward. Okay. So the problem is people will use this term satire to defend things that are racist. Like, someone will tell a racist joke, and someone's like, that's racist, and they'll say, no, this is satire. But usually, it's not even satire. Okay, so for example, when I was in high school, this one guy told me this racist joke, and he said something like, I'm not even going to quote it, I can't even remember it very well, but it was not even just racist, it was problematic in other ways. First of all, so he said, like, there's like a redneck guy who says, he's talking to a Mexican guy, and he says, I slept with my sister, because, you know, okay. So he said, I slept with my sister, and then the Mexican guy goes, oh yeah, I slept with your sister too, except with stereotypical, like, Spanish phrases in there. Okay, so that's not satire. That's just a racist, problematic joke. And the reason why it's not satire, whether or not it's problematic or not, is because there's no under-meaning. It's just Mexicans sleep with your sister and rednecks sleep with their sisters. That's all it is. There's no other meaning. It can't be satire. If there's no other meaning, it's not satire. I mean, you can have jokes that are simple and straightforward that aren't sexist or racist, that aren't satire. Whether or not something's satire doesn't determine whether it's racist or sexist or not. Like, for example, I could make a joke like, I don't know, like I said, I could say something like, I don't know, like any kind of joke. Like, I could make a joke about, I don't know, whatever, like, somebody says something like, you know, knock knock, who's there, boo, boo, hoo, like, whatever, that's straightforward, there's no satire, but it's not racist or sexist. So some people seem to think that if something, whether or not something is satire, determines whether or not it's racist or sexist. Now, with that joke, it does matter, right? Because if it's not satire, then it is racist, because the literal meaning is racist. So if the literal meaning is racist, some people try to get out of it, like, well, there's another satirical meaning, and that's why it's not racist. But the problem is that if there isn't another meaning, then it's just racist. Now, I want to talk about how satire also can be racist or sexist. So just because something's satire doesn't mean that it's not problematic. Okay, so here's an example. So a while back, I saw a joke that someone made, and they made this post that said, oh, like, poor me, I talked to this guy I know complimented my appearance. Now I'm gonna go on Tumblr and talk about how he raped me. I'm not kidding, that was the joke. So that is satire, actually, because let's look at it. Okay, the literal meaning, and apparently this is a feminist said this, right? It's like a chat post, like a feminist says what I just said. Okay, so the literal meaning is a feminist was spoken to by a guy who complimented her, and then she claimed she was raped online. But that's not the meaning, right? The meaning isn't that she was raped and she has anything to complain about in the feminist sphere. The meaning is that she, like all feminists, makes up problems. That anytime a man talks to her, it's sexist. That's the problem. And also, when women talk about rape online, they really don't mean rape. A lot of them are just using that word. So that's the meaning. And now I think we can easily see, or a lot of people who are watching this can see why that's problematic. The point is that, first of all, they're acting as if feminists just make up problems, and as if when some guy just compliments us, necessarily that's sexist. And then they're also saying that when a woman talks about rape online, she's probably lying or overreacting. Now, both of those things are really bad because, well, for one thing, people over-exaggerate, like, how much women make up rape, which is really rare. And then the other reason why it's bad is because people act like feminists make up problems, and women make up problems that aren't there. But it's satire, okay? There's the literal meaning, and then there's the underlying meaning. But I would say it wouldn't fit my definition of good satire, because good satire actually satirizes society, and, like, social norms and values that are accepted in society and enforced in society. And feminism, and that aspect of feminism where you critique stuff like, actually critique, not that kind of stuff, but literal stuff, isn't really very socially accepted, actually. So I would argue that it's not very good satire. Like, another example I can give is social commentary is similar to satire, like a lot of sci-fi is social commentary. It's not literal, but it's implying, like, criticism. Like Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury, which is one of my favorite books. I really like that book. However, I recently read it, and there are some problematic aspects of it. Like, there's one part where they're talking about why the books were burned, and, like, why they started burning all the books and censoring all the books, and one of the reasons that is talked about is that, oh, all these groups started getting upset and offended by things and didn't want people to talk about them and say those things. And so, and there were too many people from other countries. I mean, it, like, basically said that. So clearly, okay, it's satire. Like, what he's saying is, like, because I think when it's being stated, it's the one dude, like the evil dude who's, like, saying, yeah, this is the stuff that happened. So what's literally being stated is that people were saying all these things, and then the book started being burned. But the underlying meaning was that people are trying to censor things, and when ethnic groups and other groups say, or I should say POC and other groups say, this is offensive, that's a mode of censorship. But I would argue that's really problematic, because when you actually look at who censors things, it's almost always been privileged people, usually white dudes, the government, the Christians that wanted to censor Harry Potter and burned Harry Potter Nazis, etc., and they're usually people in power, and when things like that happen, it's not marginalized groups that actually do stuff like that. So I would argue that it's not effective satire, like, just like the feminist thing wasn't. It's still satire, it's just kind of not effective satire. Because, like, let's think about it. Why do we even have satire? Like, what's the point? And the point of satire is to actually point out something to people. Like, point out something about society. It's supposed to be a commentary about society. If you're just, like, picking on people who've already been kicked down in society, it's not very good satire. People already ridicule feminists all the time. People already ridicule people of color all the time. People already act like oppressed people are hypersensitive all the time. You're not doing anything very, like, edgy or important when you, like, shit on people who are already being shat on all the time in society. So to me, okay, it could be satire, but it's shitty satire. It's not doing what satire is supposed to do. So that's what I have to say. And now I think the last thing I want to talk about is the last category of satire, where it's like, it's social commentary satire, but it's still problematic and this can still happen. And this is when, like, there are small aspects of society that actually are good things. Like, that there's small things that, like, oppressed people have won, or that just don't happen to be shit. That satire happens to hone in on and inflate, or whatever. Like, one thing I could think of is maybe scholarships. Like, people will, or affirmative action and things like that. So you could have a satire about, scholarships or affirmative action, or when people get fired for saying a slur, or things like that, and people do make jokes and satire about these things and act like it's so ridiculous that these things exist, when it's like, no, these are actually some of the few good things about overarching society. So yeah, and then it's like, okay, that's satire, and it's doing what's supposed to be doing, but I'd argue it's still problematic. So we can actually think about it, okay? So it's like, first, step one, is it satire? Is the literal meaning and separate meaning? If it's racist, literally, and there's no other meaning, then it's just racist, or sexist, or whatever the case may be. Now, that's one, is it satire? Two, who is being satirized? What is being made fun of? Is it a marginalized group, or is it a group in power? Is it a social norm or not? Okay, so if it is satire, who is it? Who's being shot on in the satire? Then three, even if it is society at large, is it a good thing about society, or is it a bad thing about society? So those are kind of the different things. And then, you know, I can make a part 2 about this later, but that was just sort of like satire 101 thing. Okay, that was what I have to say.